Is this on? Are we on?
Yeah, you're good.
All right, cool.
All right, so what are we working on today?
What I like to start off with is usually I just take 5 or 10 minutes and draw a figure that pleases me. I'll do the final stuff after that, but you'll see what I'm working on. So, and if you have any questions, go ahead and ask. And this is my favorite part. I love drawing figures.
It's amazing when the things you love sync up with the things you're really good at. Ron will tell you like he's not a figure guy. He still doesn't think of himself as a figure guy. He said he was the only person at Hasbro that was drawing figures at the time, and that's why they picked him for G.I. Joe.
Well, I was kind of surprised that all these guys were very good at vehicles and concept and very good designers, but they couldn't draw figures, and I was kind of surprised by that. And again, when you go to the Kubert School, you got to draw everything. If you listen to like guys like Alex Toth, you need a mental catalog of everything. You got to be able to draw cars and buildings and bobby pins and telephone books and whatever.
And that's a 3-year program?
Yeah, Kubert School is 3 years. Yeah. I think unless you went to the animation. I think the animation was 4 years.
That would make sense. So you take this job, you're filling some gigantic shoes with Ron Rudat. You guys had a little bit of overlap. He had started a bunch of stuff and you ended up finishing all that stuff. Was there a handoff where y'all worked together for a little while and he trained you in the ways of action figure design?
No, Greg pretty much just told me what to do. Greg would just drop things on my desk and say what to do. And then I'd go talk to Ron and ask him questions here and there. But at the time, I was too young to be intimidated. You know, I was just excited to be there and all this stuff. And artists were, you know, I'd never been in a building where everyone was an artist and all that stuff. So it was exciting. The hardest part for me was I had never had a desk job in my life. So sitting there for 8 hours a day and not getting up and running around was the hardest part because I'd done construction, pour concrete. I did all those things as a young man and had been in the military. I'd never sat in an office setting ever.
Yeah.
You know, and also being around normal people. I had only been out of the military for a year. So I was still adjusting to civilian life. You know, the past 3 years, I'd been around nothing but men, you know, and when you're around all guys all the time, you become like a caveman, you know, your language is horrible, you can't be around normal people, you don't even know how to talk.
From now on, you will speak only when spoken to. And the first and last words out of your filthy sewers will be, sir. Do you maggots understand that?
Sir, yes, sir.
Bullshit, I can't hear you. Sound off like you got a pair.
Sir, yes, sir.
You know, it's just horrible because every other word out of your mouth is F this or everybody's gruff. Or like in the military, you know, it's almost like being in prison. So going from that to a civilian life or an office where everybody's nice and
civil.
And no one's dropping F-bombs every 15 minutes and no one's yelling over your shoulder and yeah, it was strange.
Yeah.
It took me a while to get used to it, and I'm sure people noticed that Mark really doesn't fit in here until, you know, I adjusted to civilian life.
Right. When you first got to Hasbro and you started working, what was the process of action figure design in your experience for those 3 years?
The process, first when I got there, I was just basically finishing up some of Ron's stuff. I wasn't there a week or two, and I actually got to design was it the Techno Viper?
Yeah, so you did the Persuader Driver first, and then I think Techno Viper might have been your second figure.
Yes, sir. What was it like? I don't know. It was, at first, you know, I wasn't really overwhelmed. I was just happy to have a job doing art. It was broken down into months. These 3 months were the design phase. This 3 months was production. This 3 months was finals. The next 3 months was getting ready for next year.
So tell me about the R&D meetings, the kickoff meetings, the very first crystallization of any ideas that you'd be pursuing.
We would all just get in a room and bring a notebook. Kirk and Greg and whoever else was in charge, they would come up with a list. You know, we'd have to look at the previous 2 or 3 years because we didn't want to repeat until after something had been out a couple of years. Like, you didn't want to have 2 grenade launchers 2 years in a row.
And they would still be on shelves the previous
Yeah, exactly. So, that was the main thing, is just not to repeat anything that you had done in the last 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you got the list, then it was go back to your cube, see what you can come up with. You'd probably start on your favorite characters. Then you were always thrown for a loop too. They're like, oh, we've dropped this guy and put this guy in, or we need a special figure.
And so how many ideas would you potentially sketch out for each concept? Say you had to do a grenadier with a baseball jersey.
5 to 10, that was usually enough. And if it wasn't, then I'd do a couple more. But mostly we'd do 5 to 10. It was actually kind of fun because if you've seen my concept drawings, I just throw everything out there. Like I said, you don't know what you want until you know what you don't want. So that part is really fun. It's not laborious at all. It's just spitting out ideas and you surprise yourself.
Mm-hmm. When you were doing this process back in 86 to 88,
mm-hmm.
Who did you report to that would review all your ideation, mark it up, and
Greg. Greg did just about everything.
Bernstein, right?
Yeah, he was pretty much my liaison for all those guys. I mean, I would go to meetings and stuff with Kirk, but mostly it was show Greg, then Greg would show them, and they just wanted us there working and the chain of command.
So would Greg just kind of drop in on your cube every day, or?
Yeah. Usually we had stuff, we knew what we were doing. It was broken down into months, like January and February is the design phase. This and this month is the production phase. This and this month was the sculpture phase. This and this month was this phase. And then you start all over. They had it set up like that.
Right.
Because there's Toy Fair. Everything was built around Toy Fair. And production, you had to have all your stuff done for Toy Fair that year. That was a big thing because half the toys they put in Toy Fair were prototypes. They weren't even finished products.
Mm-hmm. Would they mark these up in real time in front of you in a meeting, or would you sit them on their desk and then they would mark them up and they'd sit them back on your desk?
In the meeting, because we just take notes, and we did it in pretty much real time.
Yep.
But sometimes you'd hand them off, and then they'd come back and say, do this, this, and this. If you were busy.
Right.
You'd get your 10 sketches done and say, hey, go to Greg, and Greg will let me run these over to Kirk or whatever, and if you were working on something else, because you usually always had 2 or 3 things going on. You were wrapping up one job and starting the next one, or doing something, or fixing something, or going to meetings, or helping somebody else out.
Right. So once you got the feedback from them, I assume it's kind of like red markups on your sketches and that kind of thing like we've been doing. Would you just create one more drawing, or would you create multiples at that point still?
Usually just one more.
Okay.
Because at that point they knew what they wanted.
All right, so once you got revised line art, what would you do?
I'd run off of 10 Xeroxes, and then I would just go back and start coming up with some color schemes. You do a couple crazy ones, then you do a couple that you like, and then the others are just kind of filler. And then you kind of push the ones you like and see what happens.
Did it ever feel like a fruitless exercise to make ones you didn't think would percolate through, or did you sometimes surprise yourself?
No, none of it ever felt fruitless because you'd be surprised. It was like, oh, I didn't think you were going to pick that one. I was just kind of goofing off on that one. So you were just kind of pleasantly surprised. You weren't really upset or anything like that. You couldn't get upset about losing one because in a few weeks you were going to be designing a whole bunch more.
Tell me about the Stalker version 2 Arctic Tundra kind of happy accident aha moment with the color studies.
Oh, that was fun. I don't know how that even came up. Before that, we'd either done a camo guy or a snow guy. There was no in between, but I liked how he was the Tundra. Anyway, it was a great combination, I thought. It came out really nice.
Okay, so once you got your color studies, it was time to move on to presentation artwork.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about presentation artwork, like who made it, what was their mediums of choice, and more importantly, why did they make it? What was the purpose of presentation artwork?
To give a flavor for the character, because you don't really get a sense of what the character does. So the presentation art, I always try to, like when I did one of the snow guys, I immediately put him in on the side of a mountain, climbing up the mountain, and snow all over the place, and then his sled was there. So you just kind of want to make a scene to give a little flavor, and I think it probably helped out Larry too. Without that presentation art, those marker renderings, you don't get a full perspective of what the designer's intending. There was marker presentation art, and then there was final presentation art. Ron and I would do marker presentation art. Sometimes that was even done before the sculpture sheet. It was done right after the design phase. They'd have you do a presentation marker rendering. It had to be pretty big for the meetings.
And that's what you would show to upper management to get approval to move forward.
Yeah, and then after that, after everything was done, then Dave or some other illustrator would do a final presentation piece. And again, those for Toy Fair. They'd put that drawing behind the prototype figure. Just to show people what, again, but they wanted the better render, not better, but illustration.
More refined.
Yeah.
And it would be used for sales purposes as well.
Yes,
Going
exactly.
around meeting with the major toy buyers like Sears, Toys R Us, because they would go on location with those guys and present.
Oh, yeah.
So there was George Woodbridge and Dave Dorman and a couple other freelancers. They were all external.
Yep.
Were they given any direction on medium and style to use?
No. They were picked on their style and medium. People like their style and their medium that they were used. The Piet guy, I think he used gouache. George Woodbridge, I think he used these colors that used to come in a little bottle. They were light fast. I forget what they were called, but it used to be kind of a standard thing. And then Dave used oil and acrylic.
And so the figure guy that followed you, he was only the key guy for a year.
Dave Hassel.
Right.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I didn't know he was only there for a year.
Well, maybe a year and a half. Then after him was Kurt Groen, and Kurt did 4 or 5 years. So he was there through
Oh, nice, really.
94.
Good for him.
Now, Dave Hassel, did he also go to the Kubert School?
Yes, yeah, he
I
did.
thought I had remembered that. So they just had a good experience with you, so they went back to the well.
Well, it all really snowballed from Dave Dorman.
Ron Rudat recalled meeting him at a miniatures show, a military miniatures show, and bringing him in to do presentation artwork.
Yes, to do presentation art.
He went to the Kubert School too?
Yes, when Ron wanted to quit and move on to other things, Dave suggested Hasbro go to the Kubert School. So that's how that all...
And that's how they got you.
Because they offered the job to Dave, and Dave didn't want that job. So
because he preferred to paint, not to sketch.
I don't think he wanted to leave Florida.
Oh, it was an in-house position and he didn't want to make the move.
Plus, I think he was just starting to get Star Wars stuff then, and he was probably starting to get really busy as an illustrator. So
Dave was always external contractor then.
yes,
So Dave was discovered by Ron, brought in to do presentation art to supplement George Woodbridge. Now George was never in-house either, right? Okay, he was just a contractor.
George was a New Yorker.
Yeah, an amazing illustrator.
Yes, and plus George did. I'm pretty sure that he worked for the museums and stuff like that, doing military catalogs, and he had all that reference, and he knew all that stuff. So all his buttons, and that's why George did the dress Marine, is because he was probably one of the only people who could get all that right.
Yeah. Ron did presentation art for the first couple of years because I've seen him.
Yeah, probably.
He did Aces, and Ace was 83, so that's year 2. But then pretty shortly after that, Woodbridge was contracted to do a lot of the presentation art.
Yep. George. Well, there was a couple of guys who did stuff. Bart did a few.
That's right. I loved his Hydro Viper. By that point, you'd already sold through the figure design. So now this was just making it sexy, real world. What might it look like?
I honestly think that presentation artwork was just to get something cool, because everything was really pretty much done. I think everybody liked to see that presentation art. Everybody wanted those.
And so you guys would send out these packets to anybody that was involved, like Larry writing the dossiers or Bill doing the figure sculpture. They also used presentation artwork to sell the concept through to management, senior management.
Exactly, yes.
Right? So who was above Kirk and Greg Bernstein that would have to approve these concepts before you moved into manufacturing? Well, who were those made for?
I wasn't allowed to know any of their names. I really don't know.
There was a level of separation between you guys.
Well,
hierarchy.
When we'd go into these meetings with executives, we pretty much kept our mouth shut, and then Greg would do the presentation, and we were just there to kind of like add something. Like, well, no, he's supposed to do this, and he also does this. That you just make a little concept if Greg forgot something, but.
Sure.
They were the executives, they were the bigwigs in the company. You really didn't talk to them or socialize or any of that stuff. They came in with their briefcases, did the meetings, and plus they didn't want to socialize. Wasn't just us.
Yeah.
When they did these presentations in the meeting, this hour was Joe, this hour was Play School, this hour. So these guys were sitting there all day.
Right.
Looking at thousands and thousands of concepts and trying to pick and choose and not only but there's different stages. Like they were looking at final products in some sections. They were looking at beginning stages in some sections, and they had these meetings all the time. I probably knew some of the people's names, but I sure as heck can't recall them now.
Yeah. Do you have any recollections of those meetings where they just destroyed a concept that you loved, or where they saved a concept?
I've had, disparaging remarks about some artwork and stuff that I put on there, and that kind of stings a little bit. But again, if you're an artist, you can't take it personally. What you try to do is you go, okay, I can make it better. Next time I'll make it better. Next time I'll make it better. If you don't use it like that, then you're just going to get depressed and jump off a cliff. So
sure. Yeah, it's got to motivate. Ron had a story about how one of the executives tore up his presentation artwork for Gung Ho version 2, Dress Blues.
Really?
Because the guy thought there would be no play value in it. Somehow the figure still ended up getting made, but I've definitely heard that story being told.
Well, Greg wanted that figure. Kirk wanted that figure. That's why it got made. That's the only reason it got made. Greg and Kirk wanted that done, and if they wanted it done, then it could get done. They had a lot of pull.
Yeah, so some executive pulled that stunt, and Greg and Kirk must have gone back to bat for him and said, "You're wrong."
Well, no, they weren't wrong. As far as I'm concerned, that dress uniform had no play value whatsoever. It's just to put on the thing. They weren't wrong. They were right. But you got to let stuff like that slide once in a while, just for the cool factor, and just for there's things you have to let slide for the cool factor, I think, to appease your staff.
All right, so presentation artwork would be shown to management, Larry Hama, sculptors, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. Once you had approval coming out of those management meetings to take those figures forward, it's my understanding that's when you would generate what you're doing right now, the figure sculpt sheet, the accessory sculpt sheet, and also the color guides, like those very diagrammatic things that tell you every part of the figure and what color it'd be molded in.
Yep.
Can you tell me about those three things, kind of in your own words?
I forgot all about the color guides. I think we just used the Pantone marker sheets. The Pantone markers, that's like an international color consistency guide. Every agency in the world used to have a Pantone book. What a Pantone color book is, every color that you can just about think of, and they're all labeled and numbered. So there's consistency throughout the whole world. And what you do, you could rip out the color. So it would come with like 6 of the same color. So if you needed that color, you ripped it out, you taped it on, you pointed where you wanted that color to be, and then the manufacturer, when they got it, they would just look up the Pantone number, and there you go. The difficult part are sculpture sheets, because all the fun stuff's done. Now you have to do all the technical things, and you got to make sure that they're all right. It's the same front, the same back, the same side, and everything lines up, and you got to make sure you get all your details right, and trying to squeeze everything in on the buck is sometimes difficult, because when I do my concepts, I do figures that are pleasing to me. I like to do these stretched out, long, cool looking guys, because I'm trying to sell the idea. If I did my concept art to the proportions that the G.I. Joes are done, it would look funny.
What was the purpose of these 360 turnaround engineering sculpt sheets?
The purpose was so the sculptor would have a totally accurate front, back, and side, left and right. So we knew where every patch went, every wrinkle went. You really needed it because you couldn't sculpt on the joints, and there's certain things you couldn't sculpt on, so you had their parameters you have to follow. And so that was the total purpose of that, was just to make sure we stayed within the parameters, and then the sculptor wouldn't have such a hard time trying to fit everything in. Like you said, Bill was taking calipers and measuring, which he probably really had to do because the arm's only so big. You know, if you get the patch too high or too low, or if you get the wrinkle too high or too low, then it's going to mess up the movement. So we weren't allowed to do any drawing on those joints. So it's just pretty much really just to help the sculptor.
Now, we've come across some paperwork that I put in your creator profile and also dropped into the book, where you were basically art directing the sculpture process. Mm-hmm. Did you do that for every figure, or was that a kind of a one-off thing when somebody else was busy? Or
I think they started bringing me in, not at the beginning, but as I was there for a year or so, then they started bringing me into those and letting me take over and start looking at that. All we had to do is go to the meeting, and you look at the sheet, it's like, oh, this is in the wrong place, or oh, this is, I got to the point where you saw the stuff and it was fine. Right. But you thought they expected you to tweak it. Yep. And most of the time it really didn't even need tweaking. Right. But you were expected to, we'll shave a little bit off the nose.
It would look like you didn't care if you didn't have any feedback.
Or do this, or do that, not, when it could have been, it's fine, let's roll.
Right. When you first got a 2-up hand-sculpted piece of artwork in your hands of something you'd laid down on paper, how'd that feel? Was it fun?
It's fun. And there's a little bit of jealousy involved in there too, because I could sculpt. So I wanted to do the sculpting too. I would always grab bucks. I just never had the right materials I always had clay, and I didn't realize they were using some kind of putty.
Yeah, plumber seal epoxy.
And they've got grinding tools and all this stuff. And I, being a art hog, I wanted to do the whole thing. I wanted to design it, sculpt it. Yeah.
Were any of the figure sculptors in-house?
Occasionally, yeah. Occasionally Dave Ballou, I believe he did Naugahyde. And plus, I think he liked that character. I think he might have had some input on that. I know he wanted to sculpt it.
Would you say the majority of them were sculpted by freelancers out of house, or were they?
The majority of them were sculpted, except a lot of the accessories were done in-house. Mm-hmm. There were a few guys, because they were always coming to my desk and asking me what this was and what that was, and I would say, I don't know, put whatever you want in there.
So it was much more common that accessories were, we'll say, sculpted in-house.
Yes.
And figures were sculpted mainly out of house.
Because a lot of it was rifles and stuff, so it was made out of plasticine, which then the guys could just cut up, and they were doing just like Bill did. They would make several copies of the drawing. Mm-hmm. Then they would cut out the drawing and put that down on the plasticine, cut out so the silhouette was perfect. Right. And then all the handles were standard, so those were already pre-made. Yeah. They just had to find a place to glue it on. You couldn't change the handle.
So they would come to you and check in to clarify details, but you wouldn't necessarily go hover over them to check on your baby?
No, I had something to do.
You were always busy?
And now if I was up walking around and they happened to be work on it, yeah, then I would go check on it.
Right.
But for the guns and stuff, I mean, that's you want to give them leeway too. They want to throw in some extra bolts and some extra this and some of that. So, you don't want to stifle anybody.
What was the policy around replicating real-world objects? Were you told or given any direction as to stay away from exact copies, or did you have to fictionalize it, or could you have made it an exact replica of an AK-47, for example?
We did both. I mean, there are M16s, exact replicas of M16s and 45s.
So there's no kind of licensing issues or anything like that with the weapons manufacturers?
No, I don't think so. A lot of the stuff I faked anyway. I kind of knew what an M16. I still, like I said, when I was in the military, at one point I could tear down an M16 blindfold, put it back together. So I kind of knew what one looks like. Mm-hmm. And then it's G.I. Joe. It's based on real. It's not real.
So what's a favorite memory or two from your Hasbro days? Anything stick out?
There's lots of good memories. I mean, I had a good time there. My brother was down there living with us. We were all hanging out and doing stuff, just going to Boston and going to concerts and, just stuff that people in their 20s do.
You hang out with Bart a lot?
Oh, yeah, we hang out a lot.
Any other good friends at Hasbro other than Bart? I heard you were talking about Bart a lot.
Well, Bart and I, we went to school together, so, we knew each other from there. I had other friends at Hasbro besides Joe people.
Right.
Like, there were other people that I talked to more than Joe people sometimes that I'd met and got along with. Plus, I was married, so I wasn't a single guy. I wasn't going out.
So when you jumped off late 88, you had basically already been moonlighting as an inker, and it was a pretty seamless transition for you?
Bart and I were starting to work already. Yeah. I was doing a few things, but no, it took me a little while after I quit to get in full time. I was teaching a little bit. Okay. I was getting illustrations here and there. But I think I left Hasbro in 89 and I started Shade the Changing Man, I think in 90.
So there was a little bridging the gap there.
Yeah, oh yeah, there was a little struggle there, yeah.
Okay, interesting. Because I just knew you received acclaim relatively quickly.
Yeah, but also when I first started to try to get in, it was very hard to get into comics because there wasn't a whole lot of jobs. And then right after I got in, then it boomed.
Oh, that was the early 90s.
Yeah, and then it was everybody got in. So if I would have just waited, I probably could have broke in as a penciler.
Right. Ah, man.
Instead of breaking in as an inker.
Got it. Was the last big inking project Armor Wars for Valiant, or was there stuff after that?
There was stuff after that. What was weird though is I actually got nominated for a Harvey for doing that.
Yeah, it was good work.
And then I stopped getting work.
They figured you were too big for them at that point.
Well, I know at the time I was also trying to change my inking style, and everyone wanted me to ink like I did in the 90s or whatever, and I didn't want to do that anymore, so.
How would you summarize the evolution? Like, what were you changing from and to?
I wanted to be more rough. I wanted to have a grittier style. And actually, in reality, I really just wanted to pencil and ink my own stuff. So changing my inking style kind of was part of that. I always felt uncomfortable inking other guys' work. I felt like I was ruining it. I didn't think I was doing as good a job as they did. Like, I would ink guys like Bart. And Bart was a great penciler. I liked Bart when he inked himself. I didn't like other inkers on Bart's work, and that's how I felt about a lot of the pencilers I worked with. It felt weird trying to ink stuff when you knew they could ink it better than you could.
But traditionally, publishers, they could crank out the pencils much more quickly though, right?
It's all a speed thing. Yeah, it's getting it done.
Yeah, so they had to divide the workload.
It's kind of why heavy metal got popular with artists, is because these guys were penciling and inking everything.
Did you ever think you'd be drawing action figures 40 years later?
I don't know. I don't think I even thought up that far. Once I became an artist and once I started working and stuff, I was just ecstatic that I was getting to draw for a living. I think that was my whole goal, was I get to be an artist. Woo, thank you.
For decades.
Yeah. So that was more of a thrill for me because I grew up in Ohio, and I didn't know I didn't go to comic book conventions. I didn't even know that world existed. I read comics and things, but I didn't know you could get jobs being an artist. I thought I'd be working in a factory for my whole life.
So after you left Hasbro, was it safe to say that you didn't miss the figure design job?
Oh no, I liked working there. I just wanted to be a freelance artist. Yeah. And to stay at Hasbro, promotion meant not drawing. Promotion meant you became a boss, or you became a management, and I didn't want anything to do with that. I wanted to be an artist. Plus, I wanted to do comics. Like I said, I wanted to be a freelance artist, so I like working at home and being on my own.
Yeah. So would you say, looking back on 40 years of professional work, G.I. Joe was the highlight, or when have you felt the most creatively fulfilled?
G.I. Joe was my first job, so of course that's the alpha. you know, and plus it was cool working there. Everybody was cool. Everybody was nice. You know, it was like working at a secret agent factory. You had to have key cards to get in and everything. You know, people were spying on you because toys were big business then. You know, so there was a lot of espionage going on, which was kind of cool.
What, like somebody from Kenner would be peeking in the windows?
Yes, yeah. Just trying to see what everybody else was working on. I don't know if Hasbro did the same thing to other companies, but it was going on, you know, and the highlight of my career. I'm not sure that I've had my highlight yet.
There you go.
There's still a couple of paintings that I want to do with a couple of characters like a Tarzan and a Conan that I want to do, and you know, I don't know. To me, it's all been a highlight. It's all been fun. I can't complain. I mean, I got sick of inking.
Sure.
I really got tired of it because towards the end of my career, you know, Marvel would cut my rates, DC had cut my rates, but yet then they start giving me young guys to ink, and these young guys are ambitious, and they want to throw in everything. So not only are my rates getting cut, but then I'm having to spend, I used to spend a page a day, now it's turned into 2 days, sometimes 3 days.
Yeah.
And then when your rates got cut by a third, like I was penciling this one, I'm not going to mention any names, but I mean, every building had every window, and it's all because these guys had access to Google SketchUp. When you have to ink that, it takes you 3 years. You know, It just wasn't fun anymore. And then plus with me, like I said, I feel weird inking other guys' things. I didn't want to ink. I wanted to draw.
For the aspiring artists out there, what kind of inking tools do you prefer?
The best thing is a Winsor Newton Series 7 brush. I've been using these Pigma markers, the fine brush, and it works really, really good. But I also use crow quills. I use just about anything. I don't really have a preference. I just experiment and simplify. That's what I would suggest. Because I've really simplified my tools lately, especially I use a number 2 pencil and just, you know, regular erasers. But
So you go back and erase all your line art when you're done?
yeah,
So you never did the blue pencil technique then?
I've never had success with those blue pencils because the ink beads up on it and then you can't really erase it all the way. I mean, I like the way it looks, but I just never had any luck with it. And then also it makes you it's hard to see sometimes. Plus this Bristol paper is so nice you can beat the crap out of it.
So how would you say your illustration style has evolved over the last 35 years?
I think I've just become a better draftsman or artist just from not inking. So I've got to draw a lot more. But, you know, with age comes experience, but then also you lose other things, I think, you know, like speed and endurance and what you thought was cool when you're 16 is not what you think is cool when you're 60. And usually I don't work this fast.
Right.
I do something, then I look at it for a while. Like today, I'm just going and going and going because we're filming. Yeah. Well, and usually there's nobody here, you know, and
He's looking good though.
oh, he looks cool. I think he looks real cool. I really like this.